I let my son's best friend stay with us after his parents kicked him out. I thought I was just giving him a safe place to stay, but 6 weeks later, he ended up saving my life. I, 45M, never expected that opening my home to my son's friend would end up being the decision that saved my life. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Looking back now, 6 months later, I realize how many small moments led to that crucial night. It started on a cold March evening when my son came home from school with his best friend, looking more worried than I'd ever seen him. They'd been inseparable since middle school. The kind of friendship, where they finished each other's sentences, and spent every weekend gaming in our basement. I'd always thought of his friend as a second son, especially after my wife passed away 2 years ago. The kid was practically living at our house anyway. So when he stood in our living room that evening, trying to hold back tears while clutching a duffel bag that contained everything he owned, I already knew what my answer would be. My son explained the situation, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and concern. His friend's parents had kicked him out after he came out to them during dinner. Apparently, it hadn't gone well. There was yelling, threats about fixing him, and finally an ultimatum. Either choose to be normal, or get out. The kid chose dignity over pretense, packed what he could while his parents were still shouting, and walked out. My son had found him sitting on a bench near their school, scrolling through his phone, and trying to figure out where to go. The boy couldn't even look me in the eye as my son told me the story. He kept staring at our worn living room carpet. Shoulders hunched, like he was trying to make himself smaller. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I can sleep on the couch, sir, just until I figure something out." I didn't need to think twice. I told him he could stay in our spare room as long as he needed. The relief on both their faces made my heart ache. No kid should ever have to worry about having a safe place to sleep. The first few weeks were an adjustment period for all of us. Since losing my wife to cancer 2 years ago, it had just been me and my son in the house. We'd fallen into our own routine, quiet dinners, weekend movie marathons, and a lot of takeout because neither of us had inherited my wife's cooking skills. Having another person around changed the dynamic, but it was a good change. The kid was respectful and helped with chores without being asked. I could see how much happier my son was having his best friend around. He insisted on contributing somehow. So he started cooking dinner on the nights I worked late. It turned out he'd learned from his grandmother before she passed away, and suddenly, our kitchen smelled like home again. He'd leave plates in the microwave for me with little notes about reheating instructions. Sometimes I'd come home to find both boys asleep on the couch, textbooks open on their laps, clearly having waited up for me despite my telling them not to. What I didn't know then was that this teenager's presence in our home would end up saving my life just 6 weeks later. I own a small construction company, which often means working late to finish paperwork after the crews have gone home. That particular night in May, I'd stayed later than usual trying to finish some urgent bid proposals. By the time I pulled into our driveway, it was almost 1 a.m. I remember feeling tired but satisfied. We likely secured a big contract that would keep my crews busy through the summer. That's when I felt it, a sharp pain in my chest that made me grip the steering wheel harder. At first, I thought it was just heartburn from the greasy takeout I'd eaten earlier. I managed to get inside, but the pain kept getting worse, spreading across my chest like someone was sitting on it. I tried to make it to the kitchen for some water, thinking I could walk it off. That's when my legs gave out. I remember hitting the floor hard, the pain now radiating down my left arm. The cool tile pressed against my cheek as I tried to catch my breath, but it felt like trying to breathe through a straw. My vision started to blur.